Hi, this is Susan Friedman, and I'm here with Colonel Kerry Gates, and we are going to talk about his life in the Army.
Okay. Actually, my father was stationed, was ordered to be stationed in the territory of Hawaii in 1941. So the whole family went from Carlisle to San Francisco, then on the USS Lurleen to the port of Honolulu. And then we went up to Schofield Barracks. And Schofield Barracks, we were on the engineer loop, and this is important. Both the loop had two legs about a mile long, and they pointed directly to Wheeler Field. And the Japanese knew this. But anyway, we were there in May and had about 6 months of enjoyment. And then at 8 o'clock in the morning on the 7th of December, the Japanese planes flew directly over our house and about 50 feet off the ground. And they were shooting because they were trying to hit anything they could on the other side of a hedge where the airplanes were wingtip to wingtip, P-40s. And I think it was a sod strip. But anyway, my sister came in and bitched that she was jumping up and down and waving at the pilots, and they would just look at her and then keep on flying, and they wouldn't wave back. And then the telephone rang, and Dad, who had mentioned this might be a maneuver that was gone awry, found out that it wasn't, and the Japanese were attacking. So he blanched, and he grabbed his helmet, which was just a soup can, basically, like the British used in World War II, and went off to the hospital, since he was a doctor and had all the doctors in the hospital and in the 24th Division where he was assigned. Mother, as he left, said, well, if I'm going to die, I am going to die clean, so I'm going to take a bath. And she went upstairs and took a bath, drained the water out of the tub, and filled it with clean, cold water. Actually, I was just sort of standing there. And we weren't notified until about an hour later, and then we were taken off to the concrete barracks, multi-storied, that the troops were living in, and they were out guarding everything. And we were taken to Honolulu and stayed for a couple of days and then came back.
Standing, when did you realize that you actually wanted a career in the Army? How old were you?
I was 7, or approaching 7, and this was December of 1941, and the Japanese came over 50 feet off the ground and started shooting. And I decided, a life in the Army would be probably pretty good, and decided I would do that. And I pretty well carried through with it all the way. I never looked at another university.
Now, your father was in the Army as
Oh,
well?
my father was in the Army, my grandfather was in the Army, but they're both doctors. And I was an engineer. I would be an engineer in the future. My father never forgave me of that. He expected me to be a doctor and third generation, but he was pacified because my brother became a doctor.
So at least one of you in the family did.
Yes, oh yes. And my other brother is a professor of history at University of Miami.
And so you went to West Point.
Yes.
And was that a family tradition as well?
Oh no, 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 no. And later I had dinner with a friend of Dad's, which he was Surgeon General of the Army, and he said to me, "Your father." We were having dinner in his quarters, and he looked at me and he said, your father said that no cadet would want to be a doctor. What do you think about it? And I said, no, I really believe that after their 3-year tour in one of the 5 combat branches, they would really, really like to be a doctor. And you'd probably get 5 or 6 of them. And 3 or 4 of my classmates
What
did.
about your experience at West Point? What were some of the highlights of being there?
The highlights was walking the area with a rifle, but I wasn't as bad as some. I did do my punishment tours. Uh, Really, I think the whole thing can be summed up. West Point changed me from a almost professional French horn player to a second lieutenant. Now, I don't know who suffered more, me or West Point, but West Point's going strong and they let women in now, so who knows?
How do you feel about that?
I think they can die just as easily as a man can. But the Israelis have proven that it's a morale problem to see a dead woman on the battlefield.
So let's talk about after you graduated West Point. What year was that?
Okay, I entered in 1953, and 57 I graduated. And I took engineers because I was 120th out of 560 odd souls in the class. So that gave me one-upsmanship to accept or take any of the 5 combat branches for my chosen career, and I took the engineers.
And you did that because
That seemed to me the smartest thing to do, and possibly I'd get a PhD out of it.
And did you?
No. They promised me one, and then 3 years later, they withdrew it because they changed 1 master's degree per man. And I did it in 1 year.
And then where were you stationed straight after graduation?
Well, the first I went down to Fort Belvoir, which is the headquarters at that time for the engineers. And they gave you basically a 3-month course in digging up roads and putting roads back down, and anything to do with a combat battalion attached to or associated with an infantry division, or an armored division for that matter. Road maintenance is very important to get the troops forward and quickly. That was the first bit. The second bit was parachute training because I had volunteered for that. All I can say is it's conditioned response. The sergeants are really, really good at making you do anything out of the ordinary without blinking an eye. And so when you get up to the 180-foot tower and they drop you with your parachute open, it's just another day at the job. And the 34-foot tower, they had zip lines, and you wore the harness, so you jumped out of a door that was like the C-119, which it was the parachute plane that we were going to jump out of. You jump out, you had enough lead on the line hooked to the zip cord, and you felt the shock, and it's supposed to be equivalent to the opening of the parachute. And then you went down the zip line, the platform didn't move. So it was just the opposite of the aircraft. But that was all of these things.
All part of the training.
Part of the, oh yeah, for the conditioned response.
Let's talk about Vietnam. What happened and what did you do in Vietnam?
Oh, I had a lot of fun. The Pentagon said, Major Gates, you are going over to be the executive officer of the 864th Construction Battalion at Cam Ranh. All my stuff went there. All the company commanders were in the career course that I was in when I made major. In the morning, I was a captain. In the afternoon, I was a major, and it surprised and antagonized an awful lot of people. Anyway, I got to Vietnam, and General Ploger, who was in charge of the engineers in construction, RMK was a commercial firm that built the barracks and the basically barracks, but the construction battalions did the airfields and combat, anything to do with combat. I was assigned, he wanted me as a construction engineer. And so I was assigned from Cameron, which is about the middle of, a little bit north of the middle of South Vietnam, all the way to the DMZ, and left or west to the South China Sea, and east to the Cambodian border. And at the time, someone in the Pentagon finally figured out that the South Vietnamese weren't really combat troops. They raised crops, rice, vegetables, and all that. And North Vietnam were the ones that for 3,000 years protected the rest of Vietnam from the Chinese. They didn't like the Chinese much at all. They decided to send more troops, and they sent divisions, and I had some really humorous experiences with the troops that landed. But anyway, I went to all the RMK commercial consortium that was building all the barracks and cantonment areas. And they had trained the little Vietnamese to hammer things like roof trusses and all this stuff. And when they got the orders, they just went wild to build them. And the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese, thought it was wonderful because they were making troop billets for their troops. And then they found out that the Americans weren't leaving. And then they started shooting at me.
So what was your best experience and what was your worst experience there?
Well, I would go up to the Cambodian border where the special forces were, and I'd bring a bottle of whiskey and other things. I got a big box full of playing cards and everything like that from my son's class in Coral Gables, Florida. And so I passed those out, and they were all appreciated because their cards were all worn out. And I was issued a set of black pajamas, and just in case the VC came through them like a whirlwind, and I was pointed in the direction to exfiltrate. But I was also given a position to fight from. So it was sort of interesting. I'd like to explain some of the decorations on the uniform because it is rather gaudy. Starting at the top, these are the officers. Every officer wears a gold epaulet. This is the colors of the engineer, scarlet. This is the rank of the individual. Notice there's 5 loops. They're called the French somethings. I can't remember what they were. These, your branch, engineer. The pants are with the gold stripe, and lighter blue is slightly different. All this above the jacket, the mess jacket, was part of Tales, just like Fred Astaire and Dancing with Somebody. The tails go down to the heels of the boot, the shoe, and only in the military version, these would be on. This would be on the parachute badge, miniature. These are miniatures, all miniatures. This is the Legion of Merit. There's 2. The little thing there, the oak leaf cluster, shows the 2nd, and this has the Meritorious Service Medal, which is third highest, and I had 4 of those. There's 3 oak leaf clusters. These are just, I was in 2 campaigns, and this was a Korean. We were defending the Hudson in the Korean War, but the Naval Academy got to wear theirs. Ours was taken away from us, but as soon as they found out that Annapolis was wearing that medal, we had to wear it too. Now, these are the blue pants that are not part of the original tails. This dark blue is the color of the tails with the pants, but the gold stripe would be down the side with either one, either with the mess jacket and the pants or the tails and the pants. You have a gold stripe down the side for an officer. Well, I'd like to show you some things that my grandfather had made in Europe after World War One and before World War One, around 1908. Well, this cape was made by my grandfather in the occupation of the Rhine after World War One, and it's like sheared beaver, but it's wool, and it was stopped in 35. They didn't manufacture it anymore. I had to put a new velvet collar on, and the liner, but that's all, except where my dog chewed a corner.
So, Kerry, you have an amazing collection of rifles here. Would you tell us a little bit about them?
Well, yes, these are all 19th century weapons, but the top one is a generation forward, but it goes back, a flintlock, 200 years. They didn't change. And in 1 year, you go from a Mauser bolt action and rifled and just percussion cap. It's amazing what industrialization will do for the military. The reason that the military chose a rifled musket or rifled rifle, it's rifled is rifled, is that until Captain Minnie of the French Army came up with a bullet head that was a little smaller, but the back end had a cusp in it. So when it fired, it flared up and hit the riflings and turned. So, and it was as fast to shoot as a ball and a smoothbore. So, but as the Civil War found out, it's accurate at 400 yards versus 100 yards. And that's why people who attacked, like Grant after Lee, lost so many people. You couldn't help it because everybody had rifled muskets and they went 400 yards. At 90 steps per minute, it's slow walking into the enemy. Anyway, this is that is a flintlock, and the rest, and the second one, it looks just exactly like it, except it's got the percussion cap done by an English Episcopalian preacher because he couldn't kill ducks with a flintlock. It made too much noise. And this is the latest version. This would be the model that Custer's troops carried into the Little Bighorn. This is the one that would be carried by Custer. This is the original one. And this is the Remington rolling block, which was the safest weapon ever made. It had 5 times the gunpowder to fire, and it didn't even hurt the firing mechanism. And it won the gold medal in Paris, or the silver medal, whatever the top medal was. And this one is a Swiss. We're using a Mauser action, and it was much stronger and would go much further, the bullet. So the next edition was the '03 Springfield, which was used in World War I and World War II at the beginning. And it had the Mauser action, of which we paid indemnity to the Mauser factory in Spain for using the patent. Okay, these weapons are the result of industrialization and the inventive nature of the Americans and the Europeans. It's when you realize that flintlock goes back in generations 200 years at least, then this is an amazing venture.